Now I want to sew our cowl kaftan. It's easy to sew, nothing complicated. So this is the front neckline and this is the back neckline, and remember they are both on fold. So remember we notch where the beginning of our sleeve for this particular kaftan. So the first thing we'll be doing is to join the shoulder up to that point. We notch for our sleeve. I'm going to be joining the shoulder by 1/2 inch. So just open up your front and open up the back so that you can sew by 1/2 inch from the neckline to the edge of the sleeve by 1/2 inch. So I'll do same on both sides of my fabric. So now I'm sewing 1/2 inch from my neckline to the top of my sleeve here. So I'll do same on the other side of my kaftan. This is the shoulder we have just sewn in by 1/2 inch. This is the neckline, and we stopped sewing at this point where we marked 13 inches from the middle of our neckline up until here. So we have this free end, and this is the part where our sleeve will be passing through. So the next thing we are going to do is to sew here in by 1/2 inch. Okay, before then we are going to make a neat closing here. So if you have a C-jar that you can work with, you can overlock here, make an overlocking stitch here before folding here in. But you go ahead, give this a good press, then you're going to sew here in by about 1/4 or 1/2 inch. So just so close to the edge of this part. So we're going to make a slit-like sewing here. I will do so on the both sides. Remember, this is the end of the beginning of our sleeve. That's the part where we ended our first stitch this way. So we'll be closing here up to give this part a neat finishing. So I'm working with this fabric without even overlocking, and that's because it's a fabric that doesn't fray. So it doesn't have loose ends that keep disturbing or bothering while you're sewing. So I'm just going to put my needle down here, raise my foot so that I can make a sharp turn here. And then I will sew, put my needle in again and make another sharp turn. Put my foot back down and we can finish up this part. So this is what we have here for our arm. So we'll be passing the arm through this part. This is still the neckline, the shoulder extension up until here where we stop the initial sewing, and now we have finished up our sleeve opening. So I'll do same on the other side and we'll move on to the next thing. So this is what we have so far. This is the part we just worked on for our sleeve opening, and then the next thing we'll be doing is to sew in our 1/2 inch, 1 inch allowance, depending on how much you have added as sewing allowance while you were cutting. So we'll be sewing our allowance in from the top, and we'll be creating this curve below the hip, above the knee, and we'll continue sewing till we get to the hem of our fabric. Then we'll do so on the both sides, and then we'll finish up the hem and the neckline of our fabric, and then we are good to go. So I'm starting from the top of the side of my kaftan, the top side of my kaftan, and I'm sewing in my 1/2 inch allowance in here. So now I'm done with one side, and I'll just go ahead and do same on the other side, and we'll move on to the next thing. So here I'm done with the sides of my kaftan, and I want to finish up the hem. So I'm just going to sew it in by 1 inch. Whenever you're sewing this part of your hem, you should open up your seam this way, and I'm going to sew here in by 1 inch. That's 1/2 inch and another 1/2 inch fold. So let's do that together. So you may first need to pin here before sewing if you're a beginner. So we just go ahead and make all your folds. Use your office pin or dressmaker pin to hold in your hem before sewing on the machine. And once you're done, you give your hemline a good press. So once I get to this other side, I'll open up my seam and fold again like we did at the first. So here's our finished hemline. I'll go ahead and give this a press, and but before then, let's see how you can finish your neckline. Remember, we just left the neckline there without doing anything at all to it. So we'll be using a bias. One thing you can do is to make what is called a pipe using the same fabric, or you can use a bias to finish up this part of your neckline. So this is what a bias look like. It's important that you use the matching color, even though I'm using black here. Okay, so you should make use of a matching color. Let's see what you can do with your bias here. So you're going to face, the bias is folded into three. You have 1/4 inch here, 1/2 inch at the middle here, and another 1/4 inch on this end. So you have this and this on the right side. So you're going to place the right side against the right side of your neckline here. So remember, we have 1/2 inch allowance here. Meanwhile, the first fold here is 1/4 inch. So I'm not going to just place this at the edge of my neckline. I'm going to come in by 1/4 inch so that I can take in the exact allowance I have on my fabric. Another way to make this easy is to actually add just 1/4 inch to your neckline when cutting it out. That's 1/4 inch sewing allowance. So that way you just have to sew in 1/4 inch, and you can place both your fabric and your bias this way together, and it's way easier that way. So but I've added 1/2 inch allowance to this. I can either trim out the extra 1/4 inch, or I place my bias against the 1/2 inch mark so that I have this extra 1/4 inch hanging outside. So I'm going to sew by the first fold of my bias. Right side of the bias facing the right side of the fabric of my neckline. Once I get to this shoulder seam, I'll open it up and continue sewing my bias by 1/4 inch on the bias, placed against 1/2 inch on the fabric. Very important that you do this part neatly, because once it's done haphazardly, you're going to have it's going to disfigure the whole of your kaftan. So take your time. So for the neckline, if you know you always have big weaves on, wig and all that, please feel free to increase the neckline width, since we won't be adding zip or button to it. It has to be wide enough to accommodate your head. So we have this. This is our neckline, this is the bias in here. So I can fold here in and use a needle and thread to finish it up, or you can just use your sewing machine to finish up the neckline. So see the end of our bias here. I'm going to trim one of it and use the other to cover it. So have this. So I'm not joining it together. You can do that anyway. You can join the two ends of your bias together, but this is what I've done. I'm putting the free end into the sewn end of the bias so that we'll have this. So it does not have an edge that frays, so you're free to leave the edge of your bias this way. So you can, next we're going to fold it in and sew it at the edge by 1/8 of an inch. So be sure that you're using a matching thread. And before here, I'll just cut out the excess allowance I have on my neckline. That extra 1/4 inch so that my neckline doesn't look bulky. Now I'm done trimming the edges, and we can go ahead and sew on our bias by 1/8 of an inch. So be careful here and be sure you're not pulling your neckline so you don't have an expanded neckline. And make sure your seam is straight if you're using this method. So we have our neckline here neatly finished, and I'll go ahead and give this a good press and show you what it looks like.